Hello, everyone. I'm Gretchen Sisson. I'm a research sociologist at Answer, and I'm going to be talking today about adoption in the Turnaway study and really about how adoption factors into women's pregnancy decision-making more broadly. The specific research that I'll be talking about in detail is based on a paper co-authored with my colleagues Lauren Ralph, Heather Gould, and Diana Green Foster. So when faced with a pregnancy, women are presumed to have three options: to have an abortion, to continue the pregnancy and parent, or to continue the pregnancy and place the infant for adoption. Yet we know that women pursue these options at dramatically different rates. So every year in the United States, there are about 900,000 abortions, about 4 million births, and only 14,000 domestic adoptions. And I want to note here that I'm defining adoption throughout the course of this conversation as private domestic infant adoption that involves the permanent termination of parental rights. So things like step-parent adoptions, public or foster care adoptions, or informal kinship arrangements are not included in that number. These numbers mean that over the course of a woman's lifetime, 24% of women will have an abortion, 84% will give birth, and less than 1% will place an infant for adoption. So you can see that the experience of giving birth and parenting is very common. The experience of having an abortion is fairly common among American women, but the experience of placing for adoption is relatively rare and infrequently chosen. So a small amount of prior research has looked at the extent to which women seeking abortions have any interest in adoption. This chart is from a study that surveyed over 5,000 women seeking abortion at one US clinic, and 99% responded false to the statement, "I want to put the baby up for adoption instead of an abortion." So you can see that it's just very infrequently considered among women who are seeking abortion care. I also worked on a study looking at the extent to which women who did choose adoption considered abortion. So the inverse of the women in the previous study who chose abortion, whether or not they considered adoption. These were women who chose adoption, and we were looking at whether or not they considered abortion. So a sizable minority, 19%, did try to access abortion, but they were unable to obtain care due to legal or financial barriers, usually. About 34% were opposed to abortion at the time that they were making that decision, and those anti-abortion beliefs prevented them from either considering or pursuing abortion. But the plurality were not adamantly opposed to abortion, but didn't fully consider it as they felt it was not the right decision for them. They were either uncomfortable with the idea of abortion, but most typically they wanted to parent. They felt very bonded to their pregnancies already and didn't want to consider abortion. 2%, which is actually just one participant, actively considered both abortion and adoption and then chose adoption. So you can see from both the previous study and this one that women are very rarely choosing between abortion and adoption at any one point in their pregnancy. So the women who pursued abortion encountered sufficient economic and legal barriers to prevent them from obtaining one, while the women who wished to parent encountered sufficient social pressures and comparative disadvantages to make them believe parenting was the poorer option for themselves and their child. Rarely was adoption the preferred course of action. It emerged as a solution when women felt they had no other choices. So now to jump into the Turnaway study data, how does being denied an abortion impact whether and to what extent women consider or choose adoption? So to step back and go big picture of the Turnaway study, the Turnaway study was a 5-year longitudinal study primarily examining the effects of obtaining or being denied an abortion. 956 women participated in the study, including 231 that were turned away. The women that were turned away were up to 3 weeks past the gestational limit for the clinic in which they were seeking abortion care. It also included 725 women who did obtain their abortion, either near limits, so within 2 weeks of the clinic's limit at the time that they were seeking care, as well as 273 who received first trimester abortions. But to go back to the women that were turned away, of those 231, 161 of them gave birth. And as you can see here, 70% did not carry the pregnancy to term. They either were able to obtain an abortion elsewhere or they had a spontaneous miscarriage. And then of the 161 women who gave birth, 146 ended up parenting the baby that they gave birth to, and only 15, or about 9%, chose adoption. All of the participants completed interviews every 6 months for 5 years, beginning 1 week after their abortion denial. And after the completion of the 5-year study, 31 of the participants completed additional in-depth qualitative interviews, including 16 women who accessed their abortions, 15 who gave birth and parented, and 2 who gave birth and placed for adoption. So one of the things we looked at was among the women who were able to get their abortion, did any of them report retrospectively considering adoption? And none of them did. So of the 16 women who obtained abortions and completed the in-depth interviews, none of them reported having had any interest in adoption. And several stressed that even if they had not been able to access abortion, they still would not have pursued adoption. So here's a quote from Letitia, a 26-year-old single mother who was able to get her abortion. If I feel like I'm going to go full term, then I would just prefer to keep it. I don't want to have to know that I had a child out here in the world or whatever, that I done gave my baby away. No, I just felt either more comfortable with terminating it or just keeping it. I was not even going to do adoption. It's not an option for me. And this sentiment was fairly common. If they were going to give birth, they intended to parent. So the 2 Turnaway study participants who placed for adoption and then completed in-depth interviews after the 5-year study serve as really illustrative case studies for the way women were thinking about adoption in their decision-making. So Maria was 19 years old when she learned she was 5 months pregnant. So she found out she was pregnant relatively late in her pregnancy. Like many of the birth mothers, she was at first excited about parenting. When her partner and her family did not provide the support she felt she needed to parent, she tried to get an abortion but was turned away. So she said, I knew adoption was the best and only option I had. And the way she's talking about it here is really telling. It's the best, but it's also the only, which means she doesn't really have an option. She's facing a really constrained choice here that's leading her to adoption. In contrast, Emily was also 19 when she discovered her pregnancy, but unlike Maria, she never had any desire to parent. She went to 3 abortion clinics before resigning herself to continuing her pregnancy. She frames her decision to pursue adoption as secondary to her desire for an abortion. If I couldn't have an abortion, okay, then I would definitely be doing open adoption. Tellingly, both Maria and Emily became pregnant again during the course of the 5-year Turnaway study. Maria, who had wanted to parent and was denied that option through lack of support, ended up parenting the baby from that next pregnancy, while Emily, who had tried very hard to have an abortion, was able to get her abortion in that second pregnancy. So just a few high-level conclusions. Most women seeking abortion choose parenting rather than adoption when abortion access is denied. No women who obtained abortions reported having any interest in adoption. And that 9% of Turnaway participants who did give birth chose adoption, compared to about 1% of all women, supports the idea that adoption is only chosen more frequently when there are fewer or real perceived options available. Also tellingly, the 9% of adoption placements mirrors the estimated 9 to 10% adoption rate for non-marital births in the United States before Roe v. Wade, so before abortion was widely legally available, supporting the idea that more women will place for adoption when abortion is denied to them. Here I have just some images of sort of adoption promotion materials that are produced mostly within the anti-abortion movement. So a sign from the March for Life telling birth moms, thank you for choosing life, choose adoption, not abortion, and these protesters outside in an abortion clinic offering to adopt a baby. And we see a lot of this imagery in American politics right now, the idea that women are frequently choosing between abortion and adoption in a way that we don't see borne out in women's experiences in the Turnaway study. So the juxtaposition of abortion and adoption is rooted in politics and not in women's process of pregnancy decision making. Adoption is not viewed as a desirable alternative to abortion for most women, which means that abortion must be accessible for these women. And this research supports fundamental premises of the reproductive justice movement, suggesting that most women who are not interested in abortion will be better served by improving their pathways to parenthood rather than the promotion of adoption. Thank you very much.